the ego and his own, men of the old time and the new. Wheels in the head. Man, your head is haunted. You have wheels in your head. You imagine great things and depict to yourself a whole world of gods that has an existence for you, a spirit realm to which you supposed yourself to be called, an ideal that beckons to you. You have a fixed idea. Do not think that I am jesting or speaking figuratively when I regard those persons who cling to the higher, and because the vast majority belongs under this head, almost the whole world of men, as veritable fools. Fools in a madhouse. What is it then that is called a fixed idea? An idea that has subjected the man to itself. When you recognize, with regard to such a fixed idea, that it is a folly, you shut its slave up in an asylum. And is the truth of the faith, say, which we are not to doubt, the majesty of the people, which we are not to strike at, he who does is guilty of less majesty, virtue, against which the censor is not to let a word pass, that morality may be kept pure, are these not fixed ideas? Is not all the stupid chatter of most of our newspapers the babble of fools who suffer from the fixed idea of morality, legality, Christianity and so forth, and only seem to go about free because the madhouse in which they walk takes in so broad a space? Touch the fixed idea of such a fool, and you will at once have to guard your back against the lunatic's stealthy malice. For these great lunatics are like the little so-called lunatics in this point too, that they assail by stealth him who touches their fixed idea. They first steal his weapon, steal free speech from him, and then they fall upon him with their nails. Every day now lays bare the cowardice and vindictiveness of these maniacs, and the stupid populace hurrahs for their crazy measures. One must read the journals of this period and must hear the Philistines talk to get the horrible conviction that one is shut up in a house with fools. Thou shalt not call thy brother a fool, if thou dost, etc. But I do not fear the curse, and I say, my brothers are arch fools. Whether a poor fool of the insane asylum is possessed by the fancy that he is God the Father, Emperor of Japan, the Holy Spirit, or whatnot, or whether a citizen in comfortable circumstances conceives that it is his mission to be a good Christian, a faithful Protestant, a loyal citizen, a virtuous man, both these are one and the same fixed idea. He who has never tried and dared not to be a good Christian, a faithful Protestant, a virtuous man, and the like, is possessed and prepossessed by faith, virtuousness, etc. Just as the schoolmen philosophized only inside the belief of the church, as Pope Benedict XIV wrote fat books inside the papist superstition, without ever throwing a doubt upon this belief, as authors fill whole folios on the state, without calling in question the fixed idea of the state itself, as our newspapers are crammed with politics, because they are conjured into the fancy that man was created to be a zoon politikon. So also subjects vegetate in subjection, virtuous people in virtue, liberals in humanity, without ever putting to these fixed ideas of theirs the searching knife of criticism. Undislodgeable, like a madman's delusion, those thoughts stand on a firm footing, and he who doubts them lays hands on the sacred, yes, the fixed idea that is truly sacred. Is it perchance only people possessed by the devil that meet us, or do we as often come upon people possessed in the contrary way, possessed by the good, by virtue, morality, the law, or some principle or other? Possessions of the devil are not the only ones. God works on us, and the devil does, the former workings of grace, the latter workings of the devil. Possessed people are set in their opinions. If the word possession displeases you, then call it prepossession. Yes, since the Spirit possesses you, and all inspirations come from it, call it inspiration and enthusiasm. I add that complete enthusiasm, for we cannot stop with the sluggish halfway kind, is called fanaticism. It is precisely among cultured people that fanaticism is at home. For man is cultured so far as he takes an interest in spiritual things, and interest in spiritual things, when it is alive, is and must be fanaticism. It is a fanatical interest in the sacred. Observe our liberals. Look into the Sächsischen Vaterlandsblätter. Hear what Schlosser says. Holbach's company constituted a regular plot against the traditional doctrine in the existing system, and its members were as fanatical on behalf of their unbelief as monks and priests, Jesuits and pietists, Methodists, missionary and Bible societies, commonly are for mechanical worship and orthodoxy. So the Sächsischen Vaterlandsblätter was a weekly publication from Dresden, beginning in 1941, just so you know. Take notice how a moral man behaves, who today often thinks he is through with God and throws off Christianity as a bygone thing. If you ask him whether he has ever doubted that the copulation of brother and sister is incest, that monogamy is the truth of marriage, that filial piety is a sacred duty, then a moral shudder will come over him at the conception of one's being allowed to touch his sister as wife also. And whence this shudder? Because he believes in those moral commandments. This moral faith is deeply rooted in his breast. Much as he rages against the pious Christians, he himself has nevertheless as thoroughly remained a Christian, to wit, a moral Christian. In the form of morality, Christianity holds him a prisoner, and a prisoner under faith. Monogamy is to be something sacred, and he who may live in bigamy is punished as a criminal. He who commits incest suffers as a criminal. Those who are always crying that religion is not to be regarded in the state, and the Jew to be a citizen equally with the Christian, show themselves in accord with this. Is not this of incest and monogamy a dogma of faith? Touch it, and you will learn by experience how this moral man is a hero of faith too, not less than Krummacher, not less than Philip II. These fight for the faith of the church, he for the faith of the state, or the moral laws of the state. For articles of faith both condemn him who acts otherwise than their faith will allow. The brand of crime is stamped upon him, and he may languish in reformatories, in jails. Moral faith is as fanatical as religious faith. They call that liberty of faith then, when brother and sister, on account of the relation that they should have settled with their conscience, are thrown into prison. But they set a pernicious example. Yes, indeed. Others might have taken the notion that the state had no business to meddle with their relation, and therefore purity of morals would go to ruin. So then the religious heroes of faith are zealous for the sacred God, the moral ones zealous for the sacred good. Those who are zealous for something sacred often look very little like each other. How the strictly orthodox or old-style believers differ from the fighters for truth, light, and justice, from the Philistines, the friends of light, the rationalists, and others, and yet how utterly unessential is this difference. If one buffets single traditional truths, miracles, unlimited power of princes, then the rationalists buffet them too, and only the old-style believers wail. But if one buffets truth itself, he immediately has both as believers for opponents, both rationalists and the orthodox. So with moralities. The strict believers are relentless, the clearer heads are more tolerant. But he who attacks morality itself gets both to deal with. Truth, morality, justice, light, etc. are to be and remain sacred. What anyone finds to censure in Christianity is simply supposed to be unchristian, according to the view of these rationalists, but Christianity must remain a fixture. To buffet it is outrageous, an outrage. To be sure, the heretic against pure faith no longer exposes himself to the earlier fury of persecution, but so much the more does it now fall upon the heretic against pure morals. Piety has for a century received so many blows, and had to hear its superhuman essence reviled as an inhuman one so often that one cannot feel tempted to draw the sword against it again. And yet it has almost always been only moral opponents that have appeared in the arena to assail the supreme essence in favour of another supreme essence. So Proudhon, unabashed, says, "Man is destined to live without religion, but the moral law is eternal and absolute. Who would dare today to attack morality?" Moral people skimmed off the best fat from religion, ate it themselves, and are now having a tough job to get rid of the resulting scrofula. If, therefore, we point out that religion has not by any means been hurt in its innermost part, so long as people reproach it only with its superhuman essence, and that it takes its final appeal to the spirit alone, for God is spirit, then we have sufficiently indicated its final accord with morality, and can leave its stubborn conflict with the latter lying behind us. It is a question of a supreme essence which, with both, and whether this is a superhuman or a human one, can make, since it is in any case an essence over me, a supermine one, so to speak, but little difference to me. In the end, the relationship to the human essence, or to man, as soon as ever it has shed the snake skin of the old religion, will yet wear a religious snake skin again. So Feuerbach instructs us that, if one only inverts speculative philosophy, always makes the predicate the subject, and so makes the subject the object and principle, one has the undraped truth, pure and clean. Herewith, to be sure, we lost the narrow religious standpoint, lost the God, who from this standpoint is subject, but we take in exchange for it the other side of the religious standpoint, the moral standpoint. Thus we no longer say God is love, but love is divine. If we further put in place of the predicate divine the equivalent sacred, then, as far as concerns the sense, all the old comes back again. According to this, love is to be the good in man, his divineness, that which does him honour, his true humanity. It makes him man for the first time, makes for the first time a man out of him. So then it would be more accurately worded thus: love is what is human in man, and what is inhuman is the loveless egoist. But precisely all that which Christianity, and with its speculative philosophy, i.e. theology, offers as the good, the absolute, is to self-ownership simply not the good. Or what means the same, it is only the good. Consequently, by the transformation of the predicate into the subject, the Christian essence, and it is the predicate that contains the essence, would only be fixed yet more oppressively. God and the divine would entwine themselves all the more inextricably with me. To expel God from his heaven and to rob him of his transcendence cannot yet support a claim of complete victory, if therein he is only chased into the human breast and gifted with indelible immanence. Now they say the divine is the truly human. The same people who oppose Christianity as the basis of the state, who oppose the so-called Christian state, do not tire of repeating that morality is the fundamental pillar of social life and the state. As if the domination of morality were not a complete dominion of the sacred, a hierarchy. So we may here mention, by the way, that rationalist movement which, after theologians had long insisted that no faith was capable of grasping religious truths, that only to believers did God reveal himself, and that therefore only the heart, the feelings, the believing fancy was religious, broke out with the assertion that the natural understanding, called human reason, was also capable of discerning God. What does that mean but that the reason laid claim to be the same visionary as the fancy? In this sense, Reimarus wrote his most notable truths of natural religion. It had to come to this, that the whole man, with all his faculties, was found to be religious, heart and affections, understanding and reason, feeling, knowledge and will, in short, everything in man, appeared religious. Hegel has shown that even philosophy is religious, and what is not called religion today? the religion of love, the religion of freedom, political religion, in short, every enthusiasm. So it is too in fact. To this day we use the Romance word religion, which expresses the concept of a condition of being bound. To be sure, we remain bound, so far as religion takes possession of our inward parts. But is the mind also bound? On the contrary, that is free, sole Lord is not our mind, but absolute. Therefore, the correct affirmative translation of the word religion would be freedom of mind. In whomsoever the mind is free, he is religious in just the same way as he in whom the senses have free course is called a sensual man. The mind binds the former that desires the latter. Religion, therefore, is boundness with reference to me. I am bound. It is freedom with reference to the mind. The mind is free or has freedom of mind. Many know from experience how hard it is on us when the desires run away with us, free and unbridled, but that the free mind, splendid intellectuality, enthusiasm for intellectual interests, or however this jewel may be in the most varied phrase be named, brings us into yet more grievous straits than even the wildest impropriety. People will not perceive, nor can they perceive it without being consciously egoists. Reimarus and all who have shown that our reason, our heart, etc. also lead to God, have therewithal shown that we are possessed through and through. To be sure, they vexed the theologians, from whom they took away the prerogative of religious exaltation, but for religion, for freedom of mind, they thereby conquered yet more ground. For when the mind is no longer limited to feeling or faith, but also as understanding, reason, and thought in general belongs to itself the mind, when therefore it may take part in the spiritual and heavenly truth in the form of understanding as well as in its other forms, then the whole mind is occupied only with spiritual things, that is, with itself, and is therefore free. Goodness. Now we are so through and through religious that jurors, sworn men, condemn us to death, and every policeman, as a good Christian, takes us to the lockup by virtue of an oath of office. Morality could not come into opposition with piety till after the time when in general the boisterous hate of everything that looked like an order, decrees, commandments, etc., spoke out in revolt, and the personal absolute Lord was scoffed at and persecuted. Consequently, it could arrive at independence only through liberalism, whose first form acquired significance in the world's history as citizenship and weakened the specifically religious powers. For when morality not merely goes alongside of piety, but stands on feet of its own, then its principle lies no longer in the divine commandments, but in the law of reason, from which the commandments, so far as they're still to remain valid, must first await justification for their validity. In the law of reason, man determines himself out of himself. For a man is rational, and out of the essence of man, those laws follow of necessity. Piety and morality part company in this, that the former makes God the lawgiver, the latter man. From a certain standpoint of morality, people reason about as follows. Either man is led by his sensuality and is following it, immoral, or he is led by the good, which taken up into the will is called moral sentiment. Sentiment and prepossession in favour of the good. Then he shows himself moral. From this point of view, how, for instance, can Sand's act against Kotzebue be called immoral? The assassination of August Friedrich Ferdinand de Kotzebue by Karl Ludwig Sand in 1819. Kotzebue was a defender of the old political order, ridiculed the new German nationalism which grew out of the struggle against Napoleon. He was called a traitor and was stabbed to death by Sand, an extremely zealous younger exponent of the sentiment, presumably the sentiment of nationalism. What is commonly understood by unselfish It certainly was, in the same measure as, among other things, St. Crispin's thieveries in favour of the poor. He should not have murdered, for it stands written, "Thou shalt not murder." Then to serve the good, the welfare of the people, as Sand at least intended, or the welfare of the poor, like St. Crispin, is moral. But murder and theft are immoral, the purpose moral, the means immoral. Why? Because murder, assassination, is something absolutely bad. When the guerrillas enticed the enemies of the country into ravines and shot them down unseen from the bushes, do you suppose that was assassination? According to the principle of morality, which commands us to serve the good, you could really ask only whether the murder could never be, in any case, be a realization of the good, and would have to endorse that murder which realized the good. You cannot condemn Sand's deed at all. It was moral, because in the service of the good, because unselfish. It was an act of punishment, which the individual inflicted, and execution, inflicted at the risk of the executioner's life. What else had his scheme been, after all, but that he wanted to suppress writings by brute force? Are you not acquainted with the same procedure as a legal and sanctioned one? And what can be objected against it from your principle of morality? But it was an illegal execution. So the immoral thing in it was the illegality, the disobedience to law. Then you admit that the good is nothing else than law, morality nothing else than loyalty. And to this externality of loyalty your morality must sink. To this righteousness of works in the fulfillment of the law, only the latter is at once more tyrannical and more revolting than the old-time righteousness of works. For in the latter only the act is needed, but you require the disposition too. One must carry in himself the law, the statute, and he who is most legally disposed is the most moral. Even the last vestige of cheerfulness in Catholic life must perish in this Protestant legality. Here at last the domination of the law is for the first time complete. Not I live, but the law lives in me. Thus I have really come so far to be only the vessel of its glory. Every Prussian carries his gendarme in his breast, says a high Prussian officer. Why do certain opposition parties fail to flourish? Solely for the reason that they refuse to forsake the path of morality or legality. Hence the measureless hypocrisy of devotion, love, etc., from whose repulsiveness one may daily get a most thorough nausea at this rotten and hypocritical relationship of a lawful opposition. In the moral relation of love and fidelity, a divided or opposed will cannot have place. The beautiful relation is disturbed if the one wills this and the other the reverse. But now, according to the practice hitherto and the old prejudice of the opposition, the moral relation is to be preserved above all. What is then left to this opposition? Perhaps the will to have a liberty, if the beloved one sees fit to deny it? Not a bit. It may not will to have a freedom, it can only wish for it, petition for it, lisper, please, please. What would come of it if the opposition really willed with the full energy of the will? No, it must renounce will in order to live to love. Renounce liberty for the love of morality. It may never claim as a right what is permitted only to beg as a favour. Love, devotion, etc. demand with undeviating definiteness that there be only one will to which the others devote themselves, which they serve, follow, and love. Whether this will is regarded as reasonable or as unreasonable, in both cases one acts morally when one follows it, and immorally when one breaks away from it. The will that commands the censorship seems too many unreasonable. But he who in a land of censorship evades the censoring of his book acts immorally, and he who submits it to the censorship acts morally. If someone let his moral judgment go and set up a secret press, one would have to call himself immoral, and imprudent in the bargain if he let himself be caught. But will such a man lay claim to a value in the eyes of the moral? Perhaps. That is, if he fancied he was serving a higher morality.